Houston's miraculous win at Kansas was their biggest of the season, but are they the favorite in the Big 12 Conference?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Monday, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the daily national college hoops show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts for today's show. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade, and you are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. I usually say Monday through Friday, but right now it is Monday through Saturday as our guy Leaf Tulane doing the Saturday night game night shows. If you missed it, check it out. It's in your feed. It is all things recapping the Saturday action. He talked about that Houston, Kansas game, which we'll talk a little bit more about. He talked Tennessee, Auburn, talked about some of the major upsets around college basketball. Fantastic show. As a reminder, folks, this is the place to get your show ad-free if you go to Amazon Music. We also want to give a special shout out to our everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord channel, and remind you all that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 just around the corner, folks, and there's no better place to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app now or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Well, Isaac, like we said, lots of this stuff that happened on Saturday got hit on Leafs episode of Saturday Game Night. Again, it's in the feed for all of you. We are going to talk Houston knocking off Kansas, the epic final seconds of overtime in that game. Are they the team to beat in the Big 12? We still got Iowa State, which, speaking of, they're playing on tonight on Big Monday. We're going to talk about that to close out the show. And having a great offense only gets you so far. You can ask Danny Hurley and Mark Pope about that as UConn and Kentucky both go down over the weekend. Those defenses really struggling in Stores and Lexington. We'll talk about that. Some other Sunday Big Ten action as well. Lots to get to, Isaac, but we start in the Big 12 Conference. So far this season, even though Kansas started the year number one, the majority of the actual season action, Iowa State has been the best team in the Big 12. They are likely going to be the best team in the Big 12, according to the AP poll we're recording before that comes out. But I'm guessing Iowa State's still going to be at the top. But wow, Houston certainly made a statement with that road win at Fog Allen Fieldhouse over Kansas. I think the best way to explain this game is just Kansas doesn't lose this game. Like this is the kind of game that Kansas always finds a way to win. And there was no way to believe that with 18 seconds left, up 6, with a 70+% free throw shooter at the line for 2, not a 1-and-1. He was at the line for 2, easy to get this team to an 8-point lead with 18 seconds left. Most of the time that game ends with Kansas winning by double digits. Instead, everything goes wrong. Houston ends up tying this game. They win this basketball game. Now they have a quad one win definitively. Central Florida also bumped back into the quad one territory. So Houston's resume now shows 2 quad one wins after showing 0 last week. What an incredible turnaround for Houston. What a gutsy performance and an incredible win. And what a statement to say, hey, we're still the team or a team to beat in the Big 12.
Yeah, Andy, we talked about on Friday's show that Houston is kind of a metrics darling right now. The computers love them a lot. I know at Ken Palm, they're the number 1 Big 12 team, and they probably are at Torvik as well. I don't have it pulled up right now, but this begins to validate some of that. Yeah. and allows the more resume focused rankings to truly believe in what Houston's doing. Like you and I were talking about before, just even little things like in a game where you go to double overtime to have like 5 turnovers in the entire game, like you're going to win a lot of basketball games just by maintaining those possessions and not giving it away like that. And let's also not forget, Houston won this game at Kansas, even with some injury issues. Yes, Emmanuel Sharp is back, but he comes off of missing a game, played 25 minutes on Saturday, but it's like he didn't do much. And Javier Francis only plays just shy of 4 minutes and tweaks his ankle in the first half and is gone. So Houston plays a double overtime game, wins at Kansas with all that. Now, to be fair, obviously Kansas was out without KJ Adams in this game. Floyd Dunga ends up fouling out late, but still, like, it is crazy to go do this. And I think all the wondering we've done shows up. Is Houston eventually going to lose in the Big 12? Absolutely they are, Andy. They're not going to continue to win game after game after game. But getting this, their biggest win of the season, unquestionably, does a lot to validate and solidify their standing at the top of the Big 12. Will they still be there, though, when we get to Selection Sunday or when we get to the last Saturday of the regular season? I would say no. I would still go with Iowa State to win this thing. And I'm doing so outside of looking at schedules and all that right now. But I really just feel like the well-rounded offensive and defensive nature of what the Cyclones are bringing is enough to get them over the hump in just about any game. Whereas I don't believe in Houston's offense as strongly, which is no disrespect. It's more about the respect I have for Iowa State. So if we were ending it today, I would go with the Cyclones.
I'm looking at the schedule right now. I'm not looking at Iowa State's schedule, but I'm looking at Houston's, and Houston's got a fairly favorable schedule. Like, I think that might, that's something to definitely keep in mind here. I mean, their road games for the rest of the season, they're at West Virginia. That's their next game. They're at Colorado. They're at Arizona. That's the toughest one. And then they're at Arizona State after that. Then they're at Texas Tech. That's not going to be easy either. And they're at Baylor. So it's not easy. There's no easy road schedules in the Big 12, but they only play Iowa State once, and it's a home game for Houston, so that's a huge advantage for them. They play Kansas again, but that's a home game for them as well. Their schedules, I mean, KenPom favors them in every single remaining game, which we know KenPom is big on Houston right now. They're third in the country according to his metrics, but they're favored in every game. They're not favored by less than 5 points until their road game against Arizona on February 15th, where they are favored by 4. They're favored by 6 at home against Iowa State. They're only favored by 1 against Texas Tech on the road. That's their closest game, according to KenPom's predictions. So, yeah, I don't think Houston's going to go undefeated. I don't think they're going to go undefeated in the Big 12. And again, that's not even a knock on Houston as much as it's a, hey, this is an incredibly difficult conference. And while that may seem like a favorable road schedule, there's a lot of teams in college basketball that would not consider having to play Arizona and Baylor on the road and Texas Tech as a favorable road schedule. It's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. Iowa State certainly going to be a challenge for Houston, not just in terms of the actual game in Houston, but in terms of the standings as well.
Yeah, because Iowa State not only has to go to Houston, but they're at Arizona tonight. They've got to go to Kansas next Monday night. So they've got 2 back-to-back big Monday games, which means they'll go Saturday to Monday, quick turnaround. That's not easy for anyone to do. As for what Iowa State did, if you just look at the result of Saturday, you're like, oh, Iowa State handled their business pretty easy. Andy, this was a very tight game where they came back. They were down. Arizona State was winning this game with like 5.5 to go or something like that. And then they go on a 19-3 run to the Cyclones to finish with that 15-point margin. But I think part of what makes me believe so much in Iowa State is, yes, Milan Momcilovic is out and has been for a little bit now, but Joshua Jefferson is really starting to solidify himself as one of the best transfers in the country. Curtis Jones has been just as phenomenal in the starting lineup as he was as 6th man. And so you got that trio of Jones, Sean Gilbert, Taman Lipsey, and it's like any of those dudes could go off at any time. And that's really, really good stuff. And so I'm just encouraged by that. But Andy, let's look at teams outside of that structure. Like where are you at right now with Kansas, right? This team that was preseason number 1 that has not lived up to that. I think we all thought, like, after what happened last year, they would just absolutely set the world on fire. But Andy, as we sit here today, the Jayhawks 14-5 overall, just 5-3 in Big 12 play with losses to West Virginia at home, at Iowa State, and now a second Big 12 loss at home. Andy, that's crazy. We're talking about Kansas here.
Yeah, Kansas is a team that so much roster turnover, and obviously it was easy to focus on the talent of the players they were bringing in, and also the key returnees. I mean, we talked so much about the big 3 having Dickinson and Adams and DeJuan Harris back, and I think there's something to be said for the positional value of returning your starting center and your starting point guard, which I think are just crucial positions, not just for Bill Self's team, but for college basketball teams in general. So having some continuity at those key spots, having a player like KJ Adams who can do a little bit of everything. But there was still so much just differences on the whole bench was basically overturned. You have key new starters on the wings in Zeke Mayo and the kind of rotating group that they've had there with Shaquille Moore and Dickie Coit and AJ Storr and everybody there. And they just haven't had enough continuity from those wing positions, the inconsistency from Storr, the inconsistency from Griffin, and really everybody not named Zeke Mayo, frankly, who of those newcomers has been an issue for Bill Self's team. And I don't see that getting better. I don't think it'll ultimately lead to like a bunch of losses or anything like that. This is still a highly talented team, and the talent is going to win out most of the time.
Yeah.
But again, you got Baylor and Iowa State are two of your next 3 games. You end the season with Texas Tech, Houston, and Arizona, your last 3 games. But you got to hope by then that any gelling that still needs to happen is ironed out, because those 3 games are going to be critical for the standings here in the Big 12 for Kansas. And sure, the middle part of the rest of their schedules fairly favorable. Kansas State, Colorado, Utah, BYU, Oklahoma State, Colorado. Again, that's a stretch where, frankly, if you're Kansas, you got to win every single one of those games.
Yeah,
you have
they
to
need to
win
go 6-0 in that stretch. Yep.
And if you go 6-0 in that stretch, and maybe you drop a game to Iowa State, maybe you drop a game to Houston on the road, you're still in a good spot. You're still going to get a nice seed in March, all that good stuff. But yeah, this is not a team that has proven capable of hanging with Iowa State and Houston. They're 0-2 against them for a reason. And ultimately, that makes me concerned about how far they can truly go in March if they can't hang with those 2 teams.
And Andy, before we leave the Big 12, let's just talk about a team that is sliding under the radar a little bit. Texas Tech right now, as we talk, is up 8 on Oklahoma State with 40 seconds to go, assuming they don't, forgive me, pull a Kansas from Saturday night. They're going to be in sole possession of 4th place in the Big 12 with 2 losses in the loss column. That's insanely redundant. But they will be sitting, Andy, ahead of Kansas, ahead of Baylor, ahead of BYU, West Virginia, etc. And, talking about Houston as an analytics darling, Texas Tech right now, Andy, is 11th in the net, 10th at KenPom, 12th at Torvik. They're 7th in the nation in offensive efficiency and 39th in defensive efficiency. And so, let's just make sure in all of the talk of the Big 5 that we kind of said preseason with Big 12, Texas Tech was not part of that conversation, but man, they deserve to be right now. And similar to what we just said about Kansas in those 2 kind of tricky slots, the stretch, there are 2 3-game stretches that might ultimately tell the story for Texas Tech. They from February 1st to 8th, they're at Houston versus Baylor at Arizona. That's tricky. And then February 22nd to March 1st, they host West Virginia, host Houston, and at Kansas. So they probably need to go, 4-2 maybe in those 6 games, and then they're feeling really good about things.
Yeah, there's the Big 5, and then there was Texas Tech, Cincinnati, and to a lesser extent BYU kind of all getting preseason coverage, and really one team has clearly separated themselves out of that group. Cincinnati's been really struggling. BYU, nice win over Cincinnati on Saturday, but they haven't really taken that leap. But Texas Tech, after some struggles in the non-conference at times, really stepped up with their record in conference play at this point, looking like it's going to be 6-2 with a 9-point lead with 30 seconds to go. Nice stuff from Grant McCaslin's club.
Speaking of offense, man, it's great, but without a high-level, high-caliber defense, you're not going anywhere, and certainly not championship caliber. A couple of well-thought-of teams found that out the hard way on Saturday. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about TurboTax. Look, Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then waiting and wondering and worrying a little bit more. But now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who, by the way, will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. I love that because I freak out about my taxes and worry about it so much. All of this so that you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. So now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app, and you can see the guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Andy, while it's still on our mind, during our commercial break read, Texas Tech did go final 64-54 over Oklahoma State. So yes, sole possession of 4th place for the Red Raiders. Crazy stuff there. But Andy, here's where we want to go next. It's so similar to last year. Let's remember, for a vast majority of the season, we talked about how elite Alabama, how elite Kentucky was, both on the offensive end of the court, but how similarly unelite both those teams were defensively. One of those teams find themselves in that exact same scenario right now. That's the Kentucky Wildcats, joined this year by the UConn Huskies. And for Danny Hurley's team, it's even more severe of a gap. UConn right now, Andy, 10th in offensive efficiency at KenPom, 131st in defensive efficiency, while Kentucky, not quite as bad, but still not championship caliber defense, 5th in offensive efficiency, 82nd in the defense. Andy, why don't we start with UConn? How are these defensive foibles going to stop them from a three-peat?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. You don't have that elite rim protector to erase the mistakes. You don't have Donovan Clingan. You don't have an Adama Sanogo. And that's not to discredit Samson Johnson. He had 5 blocks in this game against Xavier. He played well, but Terrace Reed didn't quite foul. He had 4 fouls in 11 minutes. It limited him severely in terms of being able to stay on the floor. And Johnson, he's just not quite that level of enforcer. And I think beyond that, it's not just the front court. I think Clingan absolutely helped kind of mitigate some of the mistakes that the guards might make defensively. And a player like Clingan allows those guards to be more aggressive, to go for a steal, to try to steal a pass, things like that, because you know that you have somebody who's going to slow down those shot attempts at the rim. And without that, it forces UConn's defense to be a little bit more tentative. But ultimately, it's a personnel thing. Some of these guys who replaced, Cam Spencer, who replaced Tristan Newton. Obviously, Andre Jackson the previous year was a very elite on that end. You just don't have the same caliber of defensive players. We've kind of picked on Aiden Mahaney quite a bit this year as a player who was added in the transfer portal, who came from a system at St. Mary's that was so good defensively, but he himself was not a particularly good individual defensive player. And yeah, you're seeing that. He had a good offensive game against Xavier. I think he hit 4 threes. He was very solid in this game offensively, but he limits what you can do defensively because he gets out on those mismatches, those pick and rolls, and teams just attack him. And it's a problem for Danny Hurley's team. So I am concerned about this team because fixing defensive issues this late in the season when your team is this bad on that end is really difficult to do. You can't just go get different players. So there's some, Liam McNeely being back will help. He is a good defensive player, and he takes some pressure off some of the players offensively because he's very good on that end as well. But this is a team that's really struggling, and Danny Hurley is one of the best coaches in the game. He's got to figure out how to change this and how to get something different out of his team on that end. And if I knew what to do, I would try to tell him, but I don't. It's a tough recipe, especially as we're getting closer and closer to February.
I think yelling at refs is clearly the answer for it. And Andy, speaking of getting close to February, what's nuts is this, at least in some way, is reminiscent of what happened 2 seasons ago, where UConn was 14-0 at some point. This was their first championship year, and then went lost 6 of 8 throughout a lot of January, and that's where we're at again. They've lost 3 of their last 5 games, and I mean, January is almost over, but I feel like it's the first 11 days of February is where we're really going to find out exactly what this team is made of. Andy, let me set it up for you. This Wednesday, they host DePaul. Fine, congrats, way to go. But then after that, this coming Saturday, they're at Marquette. That's February 1st. Then on February 7th, I think that's that next Friday, they host St. John's. Oh, baby. And then they got to go to Creighton on February 11th. And Creighton, by the way, folks, we talked about Texas Tech sliding under the radar.
Yeah.
Here come the Blue Jays all of a sudden playing a lot better basketball. And so that 3-game stretch is going to be very telling, 2 of which are out on the road, Andy. So we're going to learn a lot more about what is going on with UConn.
Yeah, and right now FanDuel doesn't even favor UConn. UConn's 4th in the odds to win the Big East, behind those aforementioned team. Marquette is in the lead at +105. St. John's is right behind them at +135. Creighton's at +600, and then UConn's all the way down to +1100. Crazy to see them all the way down there. And Isaac, we move on to talk about Kentucky. Similar conversation for this team. They lose at Vanderbilt over the weekend, 74-69, the final score there. Like you said, offense 5th at KenPom for Kentucky, 82nd in defense. So not quite as bad defensively for Kentucky as UConn, but also a little bit better on offense, but still obviously a big spread between those 2 numbers for Mark Pope's team. And this was kind of a known thing for Mark Pope. Like, his BYU teams were better offensively than they were defensively. And there was always the hope that getting being able to get some higher level athletes would help Kentucky's defense. And I do think they have higher level athletes, but it's still, some of it's a schematic thing and things that may just need to be adjusted in time for this Kentucky team. But one of the things that's true for both UConn and Kentucky and other teams that fall into this kind of trap, Baylor historically, Gonzaga historically, where they have great offenses and not good defenses, is your offense has to be perfect or really close to perfect. And so when you have a game where Alex Caravan shoots 4 of 13 and Solo Ball shoots 6 of 17, you lose because your and it's not because those guys were bad necessarily. It's because your defense didn't help you out. And for Kentucky, they turned the ball over 17 times. That's obviously a problem in any game. But if you turn the ball over 17 times, your defense only forces 4 turnovers. Vanderbilt had 5 total. That's a huge problem. You're going to lose a lot of games on the road if you have 12 more turnovers than your opponent. And so for Kentucky, it's easy to look at the turnovers. It's easy to look at the players who had off shooting nights and think that's the issue. But at the end of the day, this team needs to force more turnovers. They need to score more easily in transition and take advantage of those opportunities. And they need to be able to defend the ball. And they're just struggling to do that. And you noted this, and I think it's important to UConn comes into the season with sky high expectations. Back-to-back national champions. Danny Hurley's saying it's a travesty that they weren't voted number one based purely on having won the last 2 championships. So you're holding yourself to that standard. The expectation is that you're a national champion contender. So when you're not in that conversation as much, when you are losing games like this, you're going to get more scrutiny. We don't want to move the goalposts on a Kentucky team that had a brand new roster, a brand new coach. The expectations were not nearly as high for Kentucky, and they're going to fall out of the top 10 by the time many of you are listening to this. They likely already have, but they are a still top 25 team. They are still exceeding expectations that many had for them going into the season. So while they have issues, while they have defensive stuff they need to correct to get better, this is still a solid season for Kentucky. It's just easy to lump these two teams together with both having similar issues on the defensive side of the ball.
And especially because Big Blue Nation is not going to settle for just being okay, right?
No,
that is never the thing at Kentucky. But I think given what so many people thought was a gamble with Mark Pope to be where they are, even with this 2-game losing streak, even with being 3-3 in the SEC right now, some of that just quite frankly, yes, we're talking about the defensive issues in this segment. And that's why we're discussing the Wildcats. But I mean, you've got to be pleased, especially where you look at what your former coach is doing. Yeah. It's like, hey, we might not be faring as well in SEC play as we did in the non-con where Kentucky was great, but we aren't 1-6 in SEC play and taking a miracle win to get that 1 win, right? Which, by the way, the Hogs have to travel to Rupp this Saturday. So I know we're all anxious and ready for that. But the SEC is going to just continue to be a gauntlet, Andy. The likelihood is that Kentucky is going to lose a 3rd straight game tomorrow night because they got to go to Knoxville, right? Yeah. Where Tennessee is going to be livid after what happened against Auburn on Saturday, which such a rough game. I thought this is too much, needed a little more regulation. But anyway, I mean, Kentucky is going to take more losses. I mean, it's just a reality. They still have to go to Ole Miss. They got to host Tennessee in addition to going to Tennessee. They got to go to Texas, to Bama, host Auburn, go to Mizzou. There will be more losses in there. That's the reality of the SEC. But all in all, Andy, yes, the defense has got to be fixed, but I'm right with you. This ultimately is a successful season in my mind for Mark Pope.
Well, we talked some Big 12 basketball. We talked some SEC basketball. We talked a little Big East basketball. Now we're going to get into the Big 10. Wisconsin throttled Nebraska on Sunday. They may be the forgotten team in the Big 10 race. We're going to talk about that as well as some previews for Monday, including the 2 big Monday games. All that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, Super Bowl 59 just around the corner. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities, and there is no better way to make every play even more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can bet a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. That is the icing on the cake. Before we get to Super Bowl action, Arizona favorite at home in Big Monday action, 1.5 points over Iowa State. That is something to keep an eye on in our first Big Monday action of the season. Folks, download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, Isaac, like I said, Big Ten action, last part of the show here. We'll talk about a few results from Sunday, talk about some of the games coming up tonight. First, Wisconsin facing Nebraska. Absolute destruction by the Badgers here. 83-55, the final score. The Badgers drilled 17 threes in this game, took 37 of them. Nebraska not defending the perimeter. Badgers knocked down 46%. Crazy thing is Max Klesmit, one of their better players, was 2 of 8. That means the rest of the team was 15 of 29. That is just absurdly hot shooting from Greg Gard's club. John Tanji, phenomenal game again for the transfer guard, 27 points, 5 of 11 from 3. And Isaac, the Badgers, 16-4 on the year, 6-3 in the Big Ten, 14th at KenPom. Offensive efficiency is 8th at KenPom. This is kind of a team, we talk about Michigan State, obviously, and their record at this point is, hard to argue with. They don't have a loss yet. We talk about Purdue. We talk about Michigan even after their loss to Purdue. But Wisconsin kind of feels like a team, even with Illinois being in that mix, despite not having a great record in conference play. It feels like Wisconsin sort of has gotten lost in that shuffle a little bit. And they're a team that's playing just about as well as anybody in this conference, outside of maybe Michigan State and Purdue. They're right in that conversation with a really elite offense.
Yeah, I mean, which is Michigan State has a 2-game sole possession lead of the Big Ten right now over Purdue and Michigan. But then Wisconsin right there behind them, sitting at 6-3 overall. And that's ahead, as you just mentioned, ahead of Illinois, ahead of Maryland, ahead of Oregon, ahead of UCLA and Indiana and everyone else. Kind of crazy that's where they're sitting, but they're just taking care of their business, right? A little bit at a time. And in a conference that is not separated by much, right? Like it's like, you just got to find ways to win basketball games. And it's funny because they started 0-2. The Big Ten plays 2 conference games in early December, and they lost both of those, losing at home to Michigan and then on the road at Illinois. But as we know, both of those are 2 of the greatest teams. But in the main chunk of Big Ten play right now, Andy, they've gone 6-1 in that stretch. And that's just very impressive, including like their one loss was out on the West Coast, which, you're happy to win any of those games just because of the travel with it, but just really impressive to me to do. And I just do want to mention while we're talking, I was chatting with a big Nebraska fan over the weekend, a buddy here, Josh McBroom, and just wanted to give him a big shout out. His family's just going through something of a difficult time right now, but I just want them to know our thoughts and prayers are with them. So just wanted to shout out Josh.
One more note on this game before we move on, talk about Maryland and Illinois and their wins. Wisconsin currently, right now, if the season were to end, they are shooting 85.3% from the free throw line, which is absurdly ridiculous. And if that were the end of the year, that would be the highest mark ever. The NCAA record book currently lists the 2002 Villanova team, which shot 83% from the line, as the best free throw shooting team of all time. So Wisconsin on track to be the greatest free throw shooting team ever. That is how they destroyed Arizona early in the non-conference when John Tanji made, I think, 21 free throws in that game. This team is elite at the stripe. It makes them difficult to defend. It makes them very difficult to beat down the stretch. And just as a team to be shooting 85% in late January is just ridiculous from the free throw line.
Andy, you and I were, I feel like this was a social media conversation we had, but we were talking about like, who do we think right now will be the top 4 seeds in the Big Ten? And my 4th team was actually Maryland, sneakily. And some of that is their schedule. And they've got to get some key wins to do so, like on the road, which they did on Sunday, going to Bloomington, winning at Indiana, close one, 79-78, but the Terps get it done. They just kind of continue to keep stacking some wins here, Andy, and it's honestly pretty impressive what they've done. They won at Illinois back on Thursday. They win at Indiana today, or on Sunday, excuse me. And that gets them to 6-4. And look, still a long way to go, but really, really good for Maryland to go get these 2 big time road wins.
Yeah. Yeah. Maryland's definitely in that conversation. Again, I think that's the fun part of that conversation is that Maryland's in it. Illinois is in it. They beat Northwestern at home. Final score was only a 9-point win, but they thrashed them for the majority of this game. They were, excuse me, they were up at 20 something at halftime. A pretty comfortable win for Brad Underwood's club. Kasparis Jakusionis nearly had a triple-double in that one as well. But yeah, you got Purdue, you got Michigan State, you got Michigan, and then it could be Maryland. I think they're a totally reasonable prediction, especially with that record or with that remaining schedule with those last 2 wins. Illinois still in that conversation, as we just alluded to. Wisconsin definitely in that conversation. It's gonna be really fun to see how like 4 through 9 shakes out in the Big Ten, because I think there's going to be a lot of good teams that somebody's going to end up losing just one more game that they shouldn't lose, and that's going to be the difference between finishing 6th and 10th in that conference, and could be the difference between even making the NCAA tournament or getting off of that dreaded 8-9 line, which is where it feels like quite a few of these teams might potentially end up when things roll around, which is great because there's Big Ten basketball games literally every single day. And so we're never not talking Big Ten basketball. We'll get to Big Monday in a second because there's not any Big Ten teams in those games, but there are 3 Monday games that are all featuring Big Ten teams. We got Penn State at Michigan, 6:30 Eastern time on the Big Ten Network. FanDuel favoring the Wolverines in that one by 8.5. Iowa at Ohio State, 8 Eastern time, FS1. FanDuel favoring Ohio State by 6.5. And then a West Coast battle, UCLA at USC. Mick Cronin, Eric Musselman, 10 Eastern time, FS1. FanDuel favoring the road team, in this case UCLA, by 1.5. Some fun Big Ten action, although it'll probably be a little bit overshadowed by the 2 big Monday games taking place today as well.
And Andy, I feel like of those 6 Big Ten teams in action today, UCLA, this is it's very important for them. Mm-hmm. Right. Sitting right there at 5-4 in Big Ten play right now, and like not living up to the expectations of what I think many thought they would be. They got to win this crosstown LA rivalry tonight. We'll keep an eye on that. Big Monday, though, as you said, Andy, it's so good for it to be back. We love you football, but man, we miss Big Monday. We got NC State at Duke, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN. FanDuel has it Duke minus 22.5. Duke was in some trouble at Wake Forest on Saturday, switched to a zone, and that basically took care of it at that point. And then we got the nightcap, Iowa State at Arizona, 10:30 Eastern time, Andy. Woof. That's on ESPN. FanDuel has it Arizona minus 1.5. Andy, with all due respect to the game on Tobacco Road, I think Iowa State at Arizona is critical. And I mean, that's kind of like a duh statement. Why? Because this is a game for sole possession of second place behind Houston in the Big 12.
A huge statement potentially by Tommy Lloyd and the Wildcats. You always want to win your games at home. And this is, as good of an opponent as you're going to face at your home court all season long. Really excited to see how this one shakes out. How the backcourt duos look in this game, how Caleb Love looks against Iowa State's defense. Does he have a traditional Caleb Love type performance? If so, how does that fluster Iowa State? What are they able to do? Joshua Jefferson feels like a huge matchup against, whether it's Toby Awaka or whoever ends up guarding him for Arizona. That's going to be a really fun element of this game as well. I'm excited about this one. No disrespect to NC State at Duke. That's always a heated game. There's anytime you see a 20-point spread in a game where these two teams have this much animosity is a bit interesting. We'll see if NC State can. I don't think they can win, but I think they can cover that spread, no doubt. But yeah, Iowa State going to have their hands full trying to get a really good road win over an Arizona team that could really use a big pick me up on their resume in the form of a win here.
And speaking of Iowa State, we will not have Milan Momcilovic. We're looking mid-February is the latest news on that. So don't even, we're not like a Willie won't he Janai Broom situation like we had on Saturday. All right, Andy, great to be back together after another great weekend of college basketball, man. It just keeps on giving, like you've been saying about the Big Ten all season long. Folks, thanks so much for joining us today to kick off a brand new week. Hopefully you tune into Big Monday tonight, get you a nap in now if you're in East Coast or Central Time. Crazy stuff. We'll have another loaded Tuesday night slate. And then, of course, as we get to the weekend, that's going to be crazy as well. If you haven't joined us and subscribed to the show, make sure you do that on YouTube and or audio right now. If you're not part of the Locked On College Basketball Discord, man, you need to get in on that. That link is in the show notes, and it's absolutely free to come join us there. As always, we want to say apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes, and shouts to our guy, Mick Bruins. Until we talk again tomorrow. Peace.